Hi. So if you watched the most recent dev stream, you might have remembered the chaos that was the entire second half of this thing. They were doing all sorts of crazy stuff. Like they had like Titania and her pixies swapped around. They had Reb as a Nihil's oubliette. They basically did a bunch of really random shit. They were showing off some of the animation sliders. This is a very normal thing, by the way. I probably won't talk about this that much. It's very normal to have like an emotion slider like this, and it's just corresponding to facial bones. This is impressive if you've never been a game dev before, but for game devs, they're just like, yeah, those are emotion sliders. But I wanted to just go over some of the code that we got to see and just kind of explain like how some of it works in the context of like other game engines. But yeah. So just some quick context on who I am. I'm actually a AAA game developer. So I work as a animation tools programmer for a company that I'm not going to disclose because I don't want to get doxxed. But we have a AAA publisher as our sugar daddies, I guess you could call it, the people that pay us so that we make games. But I kind of wanted to talk about some of the things that I saw that were interesting in this segment where they made an augment basically from scratch, and just, give a little bit more insight into this stuff in general, and just talk about the augment a little bit. So with that, I guess I should just get started. There's not really much else to say. Hopefully people will find this video interesting, and if not, I don't care. I'm mostly doing it for myself. This gives me an excuse to study this stuff, so I appreciate it if you watched, and if you didn't, that's okay. No worries.
Augments. How we make augments and kind of the philosophy around the design of them, and one of the Warframe augments that players have been requesting is one for Caliban.
Caliban augment. We are going to show you the one that we intend to ship.
Yes, for Razor Gyre. Cristiano is going to walk us through all the. I guess you take the wheel.
Wait, what the hell is
they hear me?
happening?
Yeah.
We're making.
Sorry,
Steve, he cracks me up.
you're
Alright,
making
awesome.
an augment right
Live.
Cristiano
What?
is live making a
We're gonna-
Caliban augment.
now? Cristiano's going to code it live?
Yes. So
He's like trying to figure out if it's legal or not to show their code in front of 50,000 people.
if you don't play Caliban or you don't know much about Caliban, he currently doesn't have any augments. We reworked him last year, released a deluxe for him, and we're about to show you.
Are you allowed to do this?
We're allowed to do this.
Oh.
All right, Cristiano, take the wheel.
All right. So yes, it's going to be for Caliban's 1. So let's just try it out on enemies to kind of like get a refresher of what it does. You spin around kind of Beyblade style, just hit everything, and you apply Tau status, do Tau damage to enemies. You also heal, regain some shields and energy for the enemies you hit. Cool. So I'm going to go right into the upgrade screen. I've taken the liberty of setting up the augment card already because this process is kind of boring. But
Hey!
it is. Nobody wants to see that.
I wanted to see it.
Okay,
do.
so I'm
Steve wants to see it too. I mean, so the only thing that would be interesting about this is that like we get to see how they actually hook up their augments. I think we get to see a little bit of context in that in their like resources menu later. So when he brings up that part of it, I'll try to go over like how I think these are set up. But obviously, like I don't have that much context. Like I've never used the Evolution engine. My only experience with it is like I do a lot of Unreal Engine 5 programming in my job. And then in my free time, I've made a lot of Skyrim mods. So I'm pretty familiar with a wide variety of engines. And so I can kind of tell you how I'd expect this to be done. But because we don't actually get to see it, we won't get to see how these are hooked up specifically. But it's probably pretty straightforward. It's probably we have just some sort of object that contains all of the data for the actual mod thing. And then there's some script that says, hey, this is an augment mod. Here's the flag that will trip so that, other scripts can look and see if we have an augment equipped, as well as like what level the augment is. When we get there, we'll go over it, but it's just, they're flipping a flag with an augment. It's not that big a deal.
We have one, and the spec we have, you'll see, is very vague. It says, now groups enemies you hit, Ortholist summons will launch coordinated strikes on grouped enemies. Okay, sure. Let's start cooking it up.
Easy.
The very first thing I usually do is I'll go into the script editor.
Steve is excited.
I'm getting
No, actually, you know what? Before we get too far into this, I actually want to see what other windows he has open here.
excited. Easy.
The very first thing I usually do is I'll
Pause. Okay. So we have a file explorer. So we see, let me zoom in on that. What's that guy say? But we do have the evolution. So he's probably looking at the code here, but it doesn't look like he has the debugger attached. So he's running a local instance of the editor, but he's not actually compiling the editor here. Normally, if you saw like a red dot on this bar up here, that would mean that the compiler is attached to the debugger of Visual Studio. And then this would actually be running. So this is probably just a cooked version of the editor that he's running, and then he just has the code for reference over here. This is probably just a script like for talking about what he's doing here. So he probably just typed everything out beforehand. And then we just have the editor windows here, which he'll be bringing over here in just a second so we can see those clearer.
I'll go into the script editor.
Steve is excited. I'm getting excited now.
Okay, first glance at the script, it looks like a script. I'll go over like some of the more interesting parts of this later. Maybe when we get to the top of the script, we'll see something more interesting.
We're
Is it
showing
in Lua
code?
too?
Yep.
This is your people's scripting.
Yes, it is actually.
Okay, interesting thing here. We actually have the level open here, it looks like. If you, here, I'll zoom in on this too. So this script area right here, this static tab, it looks like each of these are just static objects in the level. So for example, we have this script action 0 that's an enemy selector. I don't know exactly what this does, but it's probably something to do with selecting the sim enemies. On enter arsenal, probably these two on entered arsenals handle like buffs being cleared, pets being reset, stuff like that. So this is just like the in the sim script things that handle that stuff. This console activate is probably the thing that spawns the UI so that you can choose enemies to spawn. And then we just have a bunch of blocking volumes. This basically is just terrain, or it's, you know, invisible walls. And then we have a bunch of teleport script triggers, which are kind of interesting, but probably they're just locations for either the enemies being teleported in or teleports for like the companion getting moved or stuff like that. So nothing too impressive here. It's just interesting to see that their level tab is just named static. Maybe it's like actually split between the static and dynamic tabs.
It literally is true,
I
which
know.
is such a strange
Okay,
thing.
so the very first thing I'm going to cover is kind of what I have open here. On the left, I have Site, which is our script editor. And then here I have like the resource browser where you can kind of browse all the types in the game and all the different like data resources that we have. And then I have the property window, which lets you edit.
So while he's searching, you can actually see a bunch of different things open, and I'll just try to talk about like each of them as they open. Okay, so let's get back to the beginning of him starting to type. Okay, so he's typed the first letter in. The second one hasn't registered yet, so it hasn't completely updated this UI yet. But the first thing that we see is the system folder. And when I was looking at this earlier, what I think this actually is this is their configs for game startup. So for example, this agent soak or this basic smoke or all these things, combat soak, etc. These are basically for launching the game with different configs. So like loading into a level, for example, any settings for like debugging on the back end that might be important. So things that actually capture resource values and stuff. I think that's what each of these is. So you'll have a test programmer who their whole job is basically to set up a build machine that will go through each of these and just test the game in each of these different configs. So none of these are really that interesting. It's just, it's crazy that they have this many of them. A lot of the games that I've worked on have not had this many, but a lot of them are not 10-year-old games that are still going. So it, in some ways, like you can see how much space they have to scroll down here. It's possible that like a lot of these are very old or not used. So we don't really know. We just know that they have a lot of them.
Lets you.
Okay, this is the next one. So at the top there, you can see that we still have some soak stuff. And then down below in this DS folder, I think this DS folder stands for like data store or data storage or, you know, something like that. Because if you have animations like this, and these .x files, I believe are DirectX files. So .x is, I think it's just like their anim scene data type for DirectX. Maybe it's a different data type and it's not actually the DirectX one. Maybe it's just named .x. File types don't actually, they're supposed to mean something, but you can literally name a text file .exe and it would still be a text file, right? The way the data is stored is more important than the actual extension. The extension is just a way for us to like say, hey, this is an executable versus, hey, this is a text file. So in this case, I think this is the DirectX anim scene type. I don't know that much about it because frankly, I mostly work with FBXs or like internal Unreal data types. So I couldn't tell you that much about it, but I do know that this is a DirectX type because I researched it before I started recording this. Okay, next on pause.
Edit data.
What do we got here? Okay, so you see these .png files down here? It looks like these are just straight up normal textures. So it's very normal for things to have a material like this. So this material basically says, okay, with these set of textures, this is how we display it in the video game. The top one is a mesh for the sentry gun here. And then we have a diffuse map, an emissive map, and then a normal map down here, and then a material. Diffuse map is usually, it's just the color map basically. So it's just RGB. And it just tells you like, hey, this is a texture, right? This is like where the writing is on the box, for example. And then your emissive map here is usually an RGB file also, and it just tells you like which parts of the mesh are going to glow. So for example, on, I don't know, like a Warframe, any of the glowing dots would usually be controlled by like an emissive map like this. The normal map is a detail map. So if you've never heard of a normal map, what it basically is it's a representation of like bumps on a texture, and then you kind of apply that to the bigger mesh. So details are done with the normal map because it's easier to compute. It's sort of just a graphics optimization in a lot of ways. Yeah, these are very normal. It is a little interesting that they're PNGs. Probably they're not being stored like this long term. Usually what you see for a lot of games is they'll be stored as DDS, so direct draw surface, which is a type of compression that's pretty efficient and good for graphics. But seeing it as a raw PNG like this is a little surprising. If I had to guess, they probably convert this before it is actually drawn on stuff, but who knows? Maybe I'm wrong.
On those types.
Okay, and then the next one. Okay, so we got a bunch of different sentient stuff here. So we actually do see some FBX files here. So this is what you would normally see, this cinematic anim scene file type. Most game engines use FBX these days for describing animation data. Like the fact that they're naming it cinematic anim scene like this is interesting. I guess it probably means that it's storing the information of more than one animation here. So for example, down in the sacrifice area down there, like these ones over here, I don't know if this is the full animation. So like they have the characters animation, they have the enemies animation, and they have like the scene locations of all of it in the same FBX file or not. That would be kind of my assumption. And then the .x files would be like gameplay animations. But realistically, you don't really know. FBX is a pretty flexible file type. And so this could be, anything. We do know that it's an animation, but that's about as far as we know. What is kind of interesting is that they have a sentient trooper idle down here from the second Dream folder. So I don't know if this is actually part of the actual quest or if this is just they stored it in second Dream because that's like when it was released. So this anim FSM type up here, animation FSM, I don't know if this is an actual file type. I think this might be proprietary. I tried Googling it and it like didn't come up. But my basic understanding of what this probably is that this is probably an animation set. So if you like look at the names of these, we have like FSM sentient locomotion, right? So probably this is like their full animation set. It might describe like how they blend also, but I really don't know. This could be anything. If people have some insight into what anim FSM is probably, and that isn't just like, yeah, it's a locomotion set, then please tell me in the comments because I'm pretty curious about what this is.
So I'm going to open Sentient Whirlwind.
Okay, this is probably our first look at the actual ability. So I'll go over that real quick. So it looks like they have the power set ability class right here, and they have a script class on top of this. So the scripts aren't necessarily like, so a script is not the actual ability, right? So we have the actual ability, and then we probably have a script attached to this ability that does all of its stuff. So later you'll see that we have like a on ability activate, on ability deactivate. What's probably happening here is that this ability calls into that script and it sees, hey, we have these events. This is what we should do, like when the ability is activated or like when an enemy is touched by the ability or whatever, right? The one that you see down here, this Lotus artifact upgrade, this is probably the actual card in here. And then this store item thing is probably just the actual representation of it in a store. I don't know if this is like the standing store. So I don't know if he's purchasing this from a standing thing or if he just set up like a temporary thing to buy it from the market. It's one of those two probably though. You can actually see that it has like a shopping cart icon here. So we do know that it is something that's purchasable probably. If I had to guess, the data that this thing holds is probably like the text description, the image that would show up like when you hover over the mod, the name of the image, how much it costs, so like what type it is, so this is both of these are necessary, but they're basically just pipes to say, hey, we have a mod, right?
This just for a little later, Sentient Whirlwind.
Okay, so here's the actual ability. Let me skip forward just a little bit so his mouse isn't hovering and covering things. Okay, perfect. Okay, this is probably one of those property types that just keeps getting random shit added to it the longer the game is around. I think, let me actually read some of these and just tell you which ones I think are actually interesting. So we have the energy cost up here, which is kind of neat. They have a separate energy cost for PvP, which kind of makes sense. They have if it's toggleable. Oh, they actually have a specific one for zipline. So it's not if it's one-handed or not. It's literally, can you use it on a zipline? So one-handed abilities can sometimes be casted on ziplines and sometimes they can't, I guess. That's not actually a distinction I was aware of, but it's kind of interesting that they have it there. Another interesting thing here is that the way they're attaching the input to it is this first line up here. Basically, if the ability's index is the same as the input, this is like how it's activated. So I'm assuming for some abilities, like if you use the middle mouse button or something, you could like change how the input is done, and so they would just attach it directly to the script. They would have an input event in here. But for most abilities, probably this first flag is checked here. They also have an evaluate script flag down here, which probably literally just says, hey, we have a script attached to this thing, use it. I don't think there's anything crazy about this other than that. I don't know what a join in progress ability is. If people have information about what this is, I'd be kind of interested to see it. Okay, let's keep moving.
Role and ability is Caliban's one. But yeah, we'll get into that in a bit. So for now, I just want to talk a bit about what Lua even is and what I'm doing over here. So every ability in Warframe has a Lua script that kind of governs how it functions.
Actually, you know what? Sorry, Cristiano, I'm not cutting you off on purpose. I want to skip back a little bit just to see if there's anything interesting at the top of this, because we're like at line 12 right here, but I'm pretty sure we can see the top.
So for now, I just want to talk a bit about what Lua even.
Okay, so here's the actual top. It looks like it's just a bunch of resource stuff. So that's actually kind of interesting. This get level adjusted stats thing, this is not data-driven numbers. These are just in the script, which is weird. A lot of times if you had like a level table like this, it would not just be in the script somewhere and then you get adjusted level stats like this. What you would do is you would have them basically have the same like type thing up here, or they would be editable inside of the property window. Because not all game designers like have that much programming knowledge, and so you tend to just pass it into this area where they fill it out, which they tend to be like more familiar with.
And then the very last thing I want to do, and the part that Pablo will probably be mad at me for, is buffing the ortholists at the end.
Yes, yes.
Because, I don't know, they shoot so slow, and Caliban's kit applies so much Tau status. And this year it puts status chance vulnerability on the enemies, right? So like they're supposed to take more status effects, but then Caliban doesn't have any inherently like damaging status or other status than Tau. So you need something to cash in on what you're doing with Tau, and I think sticking a forced proc like electricity for all those grouped enemies to arc between each other is going to be fire. Okay,
funny thing about this, I'm pretty sure that force procs are not affected by Tau status. So to give some context, status chance and force procs are different things. So force procs are literally, it says, the code says, okay, add proc. Versus status chance rolls the dice to see like if the proc will be applied. Status chance vulnerability only applies to actual status chance. So I'm pretty sure this isn't going to work. I'm going to go test this afterwards, after we get through like a bunch of these other parts. So like when we get to the end and we see it actually working, I'll go test this just to be sure, but I think this might not work the way he's expecting it to. But it would be really funny if he just decided to force proc and then like the Tau status didn't matter anyways.
So that's what I'm going to start doing. The very first part I'm going to do is just this here, and then I'll walk you through it.
You got time.
Let me check out the file quickly. Always important. This kind of makes it so our versioning system understands that I'm making changes.
He's probably using Perforce. Most game studios use Perforce because unlike Git, which will save an entire copy every time, like on every PC of every asset, Perforce tends to have like a server authoritative source that says like, hey, this is where all of the actual assets are. And then you just take copies of it instead. So it tends to be better for gamedev because you're not storing like 2 terabytes of data on every computer that has a clone of the GitHub repo on every single branch, right? So it's just something worth noting. Hey, editing Ignis here. So I actually went back to this portion where he's talking about, well, actually, I guess he kind of just alt-tabbed and we zoomed in on it. He actually has Perforce open here. So this window right here is actually P4V, which is kind of neat. So yeah, I'm almost certain that he's using Perforce. If he wasn't using Perforce and he has Perforce open like this, that would be really surprising.
And this will be on the test chat, so make sure you're paying attention.
Okay, so the very first thing I'm just going to explain is I really haven't changed much. I've just added a couple blocks to activate ability and deactivate ability. What are those functions? So basically every ability in the game has an activate ability function. This runs, you guessed it, when the ability gets activated. So you press the input for the ability, and then the ability runs, and it does all this logic here. So all I've
So quick lesson on like how this stuff works in general is that you have a game loop that will basically be running. Just imagine a really big for loop. And then everything in the game will have a tick function generally that says, hey, this is what we do every time the game loop updates. And so in this case, probably what happens is the game loop gets to the input section of it. It gets to like your 1 key or your 2 key or whatever. And then that input action will say, okay, I have this ability bound to it. So I'm going to go press the ability. And then the ability will say, hey, I have to find the script that I'm associated with it and then call this activate ability function. So the pipe has like 4 different steps. But the functional result is that activate ability gets called. That's probably the same for deactivate ability too, is that like when the ability ends normally, there'll be a thing in the tick function that says, hey, I just ended last tick. And then it'll do that same like piping down of ability ended, okay, called deactivate ability, do all the things in deactivate ability, etc. So this is the most normal game dev programming archetype of all time, is just having an event function like this that's called by the tick function inside of your game loop.
So that we don't damage ourselves or our allies. I set the damage to 0 because the script already does damage in other ways, and we just want to use this for CC. And then I set the length and width dimensions of the tornado so that it scales with the radius of the ability. So if it gets bigger, you put more range mods on, the tornado gets bigger.
So interesting thing here is that if you get a range buff in the middle of this, it wouldn't update, because it only happens when the the augment tornado is created. It doesn't happen like every tick that the game engine updates. So probably this is just snapshotting range. This is like why a lot of abilities snapshot range or like strength. So for example, like Titania, when she goes into her Razor Wing, will snapshot strength buffs. It's because of this, right? What they're doing is they're saying, hey, this is the damage of the weapon. When we create the weapon, grab the strength buff and then use that basically for the duration that it exists. So if something doesn't like update sequentially, like in a tick function, usually it's just going to snapshot. So this, well, we know is going to snapshot because it's only ever setting the dimensions of the tornado once,
Naros, so I'm just, oh, that's not cool.
Uh-oh. Is it thinking?
I think it's just transitioning between screens. It kind of got lost. It lost
I've had this bug before, but not in this engine. I've written code with this bug.
a lot.
It's not
So,
It's a very normal thing to have happen for, like, honestly, a lot of UI. It's something that you have to specifically think about, because a lot of times what they'll do is they'll like sample the screen dimensions or something, and so when it changes, it's like not ready for it, and so it'll update badly.
Only partially.
yeah, I'm just going to click on it over here. All right,
Can
yeah,
you
so
try 50?
Does you want me to do
just
50?
Do 50.
I want to see something break.
Yeah, just
Okay.
do 50. Let's start.
I love game dev.
So can I ship it?
Yes.
No.
Come on.
Okay.
Okay.
It's pretty wicked though.
Then I set up some values that I'm going to use for like position finding, so like where to teleport the guys. Right here I ask for the AI director because I'm going to do some stuff that I'll explain later. We want
So some quick information on what the AI director is in general. A lot of games, what you'll see is that you'll have a bunch of enemies or allies or just anything that's not controlled by the player. And the director's job is just to say, okay, this is what you should be doing at this specific point. This is also the reason that like if you ever just go into like the sim, for example, and you just have a bunch of enemies firing at you, you'll notice that like not all of them fire at the same time. A lot of times you'll have like 1 or 2 heavy gunners shooting at you at the same time, even though there's 20 of them on the screen. And the reason for that is because of the AI director. So like they'll be like passing around tokens to decide which ones are allowed to fire at any time. And it'll also control like how they move relative to the player and things like that. So this is like a really important piece of code that they're kind of just glossing over. But like the AI director handles a lot of the brains of basically everything that isn't a player.
And the very last thing I want to talk about before we teleport them is we try to find a nice spot for them on the navmesh. Now the navmesh is actually just this kind of simplification we have of the level geometry. I don't know if you can see on my screen here, there's like an overlay. This is basically what the AI sees as like the navigable play space for it. So you kind of want whatever position I calculated to find the nearest spot on this space, because if you put them inside a wall or if you put them somewhere that's not on this space, they will have no idea what on earth to do and they'll just be stuck.
So interesting note about navmesh. This shit is so annoying to do by hand. I really hate doing navmesh by hand. So I don't know if they have any like utilities. So like each of these parts of the level will have their own navmesh on them, but a lot of times that is not the case. And so somebody will have to go in by hand and draw these triangles on top of the actual mesh. So that's probably why you see a lot of these things being kind of uneven, or just random looking. It's because a human had to come in here and like actually do this. Not 100% saying that's the case. Like it's very likely that they have some amount of code here that will do a lot of this generation for them. But if I had to guess, a good portion of it will be manually edited by humans afterwards.
And we really don't want that. So let's stick them somewhere on the navmesh that makes sense for them. All right. Let's do this. Summon them. Ortholists, go. There they are.
Whoa!
That's cool.
They're so cute.
But like
Oh, that
this-
is.
You kind of see what I mean? They're shooting so slow that it's like boring. So I'm going to give them a fire rate buff, and I'm going to give them some electricity status for the culture.
You know what? If people are using the augment slot, they better get that.
That's what I'm saying.
That's
and
what I'm
also,
saying.
I don't know if you've noticed, but there's nothing that the augment card level could scale right now, because all it does is teleport these guys. It doesn't have anything special about it. But if we add buffs, then the augment card can scale the intensity, or like the magnitude of those buffs, as well as the duration for the buffs. So it kind of gives us design levers to pull for balance and fun finding as well. So that's just the very next bit I'm going to do. It's really a tiny modification, so I don't even have to like copy in anything major. I'm just going to go back down to where we teleport the summons right here. So the reason I'm doing it in here is because it happens right at the end, and we're already iterating through all the different summons, and I want to buff those guys. So I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to paste this. Now this is pretty much like, it's legible almost in plain English as it is. It says, update timed upgrade, so it's giving them a timed upgrade. It's saying that the amount of time that upgrade should last for is 5 seconds. The type is weapon fire rate, and we're multiplying that by 20 because I think that's going to be fun.
No, I'm scared.
And then here we're adding weapon force proc chance, so we're giving it a force proc. We're doing add 1, so this isn't percent, right? So 1 is 100.
Okay, yeah. I think I'm right about this. I don't think this is going to work with task status. I'll let him finish, but
100%, so we're adding 100% status chance, and we're doing it for the type PT electrocution, which is proc type electric, the electric status chance. Right, so if I just actually save my file, that would be smart, and then do this here.
yeah, so you can actually see that it is proccing electric. You can see the electric. It's kind of blurry, but those are electric things right next to the task status. What is happening here is he literally added a forced electric proc to this. And so let me just go into the sim and just show this off. I actually want to test this for real too, just to make sure I'm actually right about this. So I'm going to grab a friend who actually has a Caliban that's not subsumed, and just see if we can get it to work real quick. Okay, we are trying out the thingy. I'm just having him stack 10 stacks. Shout out to Livid for helping me out for this. Sweet. Okay, so hopefully we have 10 stacks here. I've shot twice. So it is looking like the force proc is not affected by this. Thanks. Yay. Force procs aren't affected by task status. So that's pretty sad. What that mostly means for us is that the purpose of these two things was to have the Tau status like make more procs on the enemy, but because he's setting it up as a force proc, this is just not going to function correctly, which is very on brand for DE in general, but I just thought it was pretty funny. Okay, I think that's mostly all I wanted to cover on this. The rest of the dev stream for all of this stuff is mostly just scripts that are kind of interesting. There wasn't anything on here that I was like, yeah, I definitely need to talk about this. This was kind of interesting that these blocks are spawnable, but this is like a very normal thing. Like big head mode's very normal too. Like, I don't know. So the rest of this is interesting, but not from a programming perspective. So I'm not going to really try to go over them that much. But yeah, we'll probably call it here. Thanks for watching. If you want me to do more like overviews of this kind of stuff, please let me know in the comments. I'm not really that good at the YouTube stuff. So I'll just do my best, but hopefully people find this interesting.